Hello, hi. Hi, everyone. It's good to be back here. I mean, it's also good to be back in physical space and seeing a lot of familiar faces around here. So we only have 15 minutes to talk about a very complex subject, so let's roll. So the question of the breakup of the internet happened to, you have to experience it, and for me, I experienced that in 2007, I think it was in Beijing, and I was walking, we were basically lost with a friend of ours, Martin Vasavsky, for those who know him, and we're basically stuck in Beijing, and we had no idea where we were. So I basically took my BlackBerry and started looking on Google Maps, and this is what happened. Basically, for the first time, I experienced the idea that the experience of the internet was not the same in every country. Actually, I'd like to talk a little bit about the open internet and thinking about what the internet would be if it was not open. First of all, if it was no open internet, none of us would be here on this stage. I mean, think about it. I would have probably been either an historian or a pianist, but none of us would have had this opportunity. It is something absolutely incredible, and as you said earlier, something we need to fight for. So basically, I've been mostly in the Web 2.0 era for a long time. Most of the product I've been building were focused on one very simple idea, is how to give the user control of their data and attention. So attention with Netvibes and data with Jolicloud. The problem, and one of the things that really irritated me, is that Europe has been pretty much in what I call a passenger seat innovation model, where basically let's let the big boy build the internet, let America, let China build infrastructure, and we will just build the economy on top of this. But as you know, or probably know, it is not true, because the second age of the internet was almost entirely built in Europe. Think about Linux, think about the web, think about MySQL, IRC, MPEG, MP3, Docker, all this technology that are the bricks were actually built here in Europe. So one of the things that happened to me and basically changed my perspective was the Paris attack of 2015. I know a few of you know about it, but basically I was meant to go to a friend's birthday party, and I was a little bit late, and then my mom called me and said, check out the news, I think something is happening, and I stayed home. And that's the only reason I'm here in front of you, sitting in front of you, because at the same time, all my friends and 19 people were killed and shot. And basically, what really struck me was, beside this horrible event, also happened to my dad with the Charlie Hebdo, but it's the fact that the people who were basically killed my friends were radicalized through social media. I spent some time trying to digest this and came with this idea of a slow web. How do we build technology that doesn't make us go crazy? I wrote a piece. It was actually also translated in German, and on the speaker, I think it was Die Zeit, sorry, Jochen did the translation. Thank you again, Jochen, for that. And I went on a very different path. So when everyone I knew was going in the Web3 world, I decided to pretty much look at the free webs and looking at how I believe the internet could potentially break up. So what's very interesting with the Splinter Net is it's actually China connect to the internet in 1994. And basically 3 years later, they already have the Great Firewall. But the Great Firewall is very fascinating because it's a semi-permeable interface. It allows the knowledge to come in, but not the ideology. And of course, as everything you build, you have to create an upgrade. And a few years later, there's been what I call a Splinternet 1.5. And basically, the first Splinternet was about trying to get everything at connection level. But suddenly, China was building startups and basically getting rid of all the companies they didn't like. Facebook, Google, etc. And of course, the one that could stay and had to stay because they had no other choice, like Apple, had to be on a very, very strict model, very different from what we have in Europe, of course. Because of that, in some ways, they escaped what I call the Splinter Net. And in some ways, what is fascinating with the internet is that, first of all, it kind of break up countries separated, but it also within countries started breaking up the country from the inside and creating different groups. Look at what happened with Brexit in the US, what happened just weeks ago in Brazil. I mean, not weeks ago, days ago in Brazil. And one of the reasons this thing happened is what I believe is the radicalization of the basic stack. If you think about the way the internet has been built, basically the modern internet happens with the iMac. If you remember, we had our computer and we had our stuff. CDs, DVDs, cards, pretty much everything was on our computer. It was personal. So in a way, it was very easy to understand what was part of our personal space or intimacy, what was the public space, and what was the commercial space, like when you go on Amazon, for example. But things started to change. Suddenly, with the cloud and the iPhone, what used to be our personal stuff suddenly has been uploaded in the cloud and started being run by algorithm. Our intimacy became computational. Similar thing happened on the public space, because if you think about social media, suddenly the entire debate is organized by algorithm. It's the rise of what we call the hashtag activism. You know, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, MAGA, etc. Suddenly the entire thing is spinning out of control. And basically, without knowing it, we have a commercial space, understand by commercial space, ad-driven space, but has grown way beyond what we had before. And overnight, it became weaponized. Because suddenly we discover that not only we have no control over the intimacy, what's going on in the mind of people, in the phone of people, on the public debate. Many countries freaked out, and for many good or bad reasons, the only way they had to do this was to use the lockdown of the web. That is what we call internet blackout. You just shut down the internet. There's countries like India who had 100 different shutdowns, and I think Ethiopia has been on a shutdown for the last 18 months. Europe's answer, of course, was regulation, 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 and regulation, as you can see. But of course, it's not enough. India went nuclear and decided that TikTok and so many other apps, I think 100 apps, were to go out of the App Store. And here we are with a new era, the Splinternet 2.0. To understand the Splinternet 2.0, you have to understand a very interesting concept. It's the militarization of interdependency. This is pretty insane when you think about it. Imagine you're the US. You need China to build the iPhones. But in the meantime, you're going to ask China to regulate certain access to certain components, and you're going to try to destroy Huawei mobile business. And suddenly, we believe that business was designed to prevent war. And what we've seen was basically that we can actually fight and do business at the same time. The official start of the Splinternet 2.0 is what happened in Iran, where suddenly we believe that open source was protected. But open source is under US legislation when you have a US foundation. And many developers in Iran stopped having access to basic tools like GitHub and libraries. We've seen Russia trying to, they claim to have tested a self-sustainable, basically the ability to use the internet without being connected to the outside. I've asked two friends of mine who are basically working on this specific issue in France and in another country, and they told me, we don't know. Nobody independently verified the claim. But you have also what happened in Afghanistan, where overnight, Google disconnected the government. And that started to get through a lot of countries thinking, well, what are my dependencies? How do I operate in that stage? And the new space where we live is basically an internet where the internet now is the battlefield. The internet was weaponized before, but now it is the battlefield. The commercial internet is a war battlefield. You've seen it with cyber attacks, you've seen it with so many other things. Let me give you another map, but we don't talk a lot about, is the submarine cables. What happened if someone alter or break these cables? Actually, it happened a few times. And at the moment, the French, the German, and many of the military navy of countries are surrounding certain areas to make sure that these cables are protected. But let's go beyond this. With COVID, the shortage of chip, the invasion of Ukraine, of course, shortage of electricity. Don't forget, to run the internet, you need cheap electricity. And you also need water. If you don't have the two of them, then you're not very competitive in this world of the cloud. This is our new reality. Sorry, I'm just going to get a little bit of glass of water. So every country is basically changing its path. We're talking about onshoring now. We need to build the chip back in Europe, in the US. Good luck. Digital sovereignty is the new thing. Data localization, etc. And edge computing as well, but is the localized version of the cloud. And the funny thing is, if you think about it, we criticized China years ago for protecting themselves. And in some ways, we're kind of doing the same thing. For obviously different reasons, but still going in the same direction. So to talk a little bit about edge computing is funny. This is a company I advised was doing, so this is, I cannot say the location, I'm not allowed to, but this is Starlink connected to this little box. And this little box basically turned the entire neighborhood in a 5G hotspot, and you can actually run very easily 5G in a place where, of course, the internet, for obvious reasons, doesn't work anymore. So this new reality got me thinking, and at the moment, I'm basically trying to figure out, working on this idea of digital resiliency through a think tank. I'd be happy if you want to talk to me about this issue. Already identified about 100 companies that we would need in case of major event. Basically, if you want to run the internet with less energy, a degraded system, basically a different environment but the one we had just in 2019, how do you do? Where do you work? Do you invest in AI? Do you invest in APIs? What are the interdependencies that you need? These are very, very, very important thinking. And personally, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure a lot of you, we need to figure out the future in a very different way than it was observed. Before, it was just about growing and growing and growing. The world is flat. Today, it's a little bit more complex. I believe that if the old web is dead, unfortunately, there's an opportunity to build a new act, something that will be hyperlocal but global at the same time, that will create new layers of resiliency. There's so much work to do, and I'm looking forward to discuss about it with you. Thank you so much.